Good afternoon and welcome to the GENCAP Power Hour. I'm Scott Nasca, President of Generation Capital Management. I want to thank all our viewers for taking the time to join in. The purpose of GENCAP Power Hour is we're trying to provide to our community thoughtful and provoking conversations on topics that will have a broad appeal for our audience. We're fortunate to have industry leaders within our local community, as well as nationally recognized experts that will be joining us over the next few sessions to continue to build upon the Power Hour structure. Please type any questions that you might have throughout the presentation. We'll try to answer as many as we can, time permitting, at the end of our discussion. This is an exciting conversation here today, and we're pleased with the guests that we're going to have. But basically, America is aging fast. As of 2019, the 65 and older population has increased to 54.1 million people, and that represents almost 16% of the population. By 2040, seniors are projected to represent over 21.6% of the population. With respect to financial health, older Americans over 65 have the most to lose in terms of net worth. Now, the statistics that I mentioned above were taken from our guest speakers February 20. Esquire. She's the managing partner and CEO of Jacko Law Group, which offers securities, corporate, real estate, and employment law counsel to broker-dealers, investment advisors, and investment companies, hedge funds and private equity funds, and other financial industry professionals. She's also the CEO of Core Compliance and Legal Services, a compliance consultation firm in San Diego. As a frequent presenter, Michelle headlines a lot of national industry conferences. She delivers insightful, thought-provoking workshops regarding industry hot topics and rising compliance issues. She's a frequent contributor to various industry journals. Ms. Jacko has served as vice chair of the Education of the Corporations Committee for the State Bar of California Business Law Section and is a two-time former board member for the National Society of Compliance Professionals. In 2020, she was selected as the SDBGA's 2020 San Diego 500 Influential Business Leader Award and SDBGA's prestigious 2020 Most Admired CEOs Award. I'm happy to have Michelle Jacko join us at this point in time.
Thank you so much, Scott, for the warm introduction. It's great to be here with you today.
Michelle, it's an honor for us. Good morning to you out in sunny San Diego, it looks like. So thank you for taking the time to, talk about an interesting topic that's very important in our industry and for, basically not just financial professionals, but also our clients and people who, are going through this, either a loved one that's going through it or something that they're going through themselves. So basically, first thing is, just want to give an idea of financial elder abuse. And I'm just going to read just basically a definition, and I'll jump in with you on this, Michelle. It says financial elder abuse involves taking advantage of older people and unfairly benefiting from their monetary resources. Family members, business associates, caregivers, and strangers sometimes financially abuse elders by taking advantage of their trust. Tactics involved in financial elder abuse include the unauthorized use of an older person's assets, gaining power of attorney by way of trickery, or engaging in fraud. I think a good point now, Michelle, would be if you could just provide a timeline of actions that regulators have introduced and the impact it's having on the financial industry.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I think what's really staggering and shocking to the conscious is that when you take a look at who is the most likely offenders of elder abuse, it's actually the children of the parents. And it's just really, really sad. And I think, Scott, this really all started from a regulatory standpoint. I'm a big proponent of history and kind of walking through and saying where we're at and why are we where we are today. And here's the direction that the regulations are going. In 2015, it was February 2015, the SEC appointed its first investor advocate, a gentleman by the name of Rick Fleming. And I think he set the stage when he said, advisors have a role in protecting investors. And ever since that time, he led the charge towards advocacy on behalf of senior investors. And we started seeing a number of releases coming out from the SEC. April 2015, we had the first SEC and FINRA joint report where they looked at all these examinations of members, their registrants. And you know what they found, which was, again, shocking? Only 13% of firms had actually dealt with how are they going to protect a senior investor, either through supervision, adoption of policies and procedures, or other controls, just training folks about how do we detect elder abuse. And then later that year, just a couple of months later in June, the SEC then released their own bulletin, and it was called Planning for Diminished Capacity and Illness. And you know, if I'm you know, my parents are up in age at this point in my life, and if I were to give them one article to read, I'd go to the SEC website and give them that, because it really encouraged investors about how to plan for diminished capacity. What are some of the signs for you know, financial abuse, and most importantly, how do we put people in a position of power, you know, so that they can keep their documents up to date? Do they have a trusted contact? And that kind of almost went into then what we started seeing on the state level. So for those of you, and it depends on the state, but you know, interestingly, most of the East Coast has adopted, or many states have adopted, what's called the NASA model rule. And that was released in January 2016. And for the first time, we saw state regulators coming out, and they said, look, there's going to be 5 features of what we want the states to think about. We want you to mandatorily report if there is a sign of elder abuse. We also want you to take efforts to try to get a trusted contact, someone that you would turn to in the case of potential financial exploitation, and ask for help. We also want to see that if the client could give us permission ahead of time, before there was ever any kind of elder abuse, to notify this trusted contact and say, I'm concerned about so-and-so. The other facet to all of this is that it also, for the first time, would allow a financial advisor to temporarily delay disbursement of funds. So if you got a request for a wire transfer to a third party, and you started questioning, you're like, boy, this just doesn't pass the smell test, and you think there's some financial exploitation going on, you know, that would allow and permit the advisor to take control of that. And so, you know, I think that all of those were great steps forward to try to protect the end investor.
So Michelle, where do you see this going in the future then? I mean, you've seen the first steps that have been made, and you know, it is something as the population gets older and it represents a greater percentage of, you know, let's say the American population. What other regulatory steps do you think need to be made, or probably are going to be made to you know, continue to elevate the concerns that are out there?
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's a great question, and there's a couple of different things. You know, what FINRA actually did for its member firms is they started mandating certain things, and I know that that's now part of your practice, Scott, by extension, is being an investment advisor who uses a broker-dealer custodian. You know, you now have to, under certain rules, get what is this trusted contact information. So at account opening, you're asking clients, look, is there someone, a son, a daughter, a best friend, somebody in a position of trust that I can turn to in the event, not to share your account information, not to give you any kind of confidential information, but just to tell them, look, I'm concerned about this person. Either they're showing signs of diminished capacity, they're showing signs of financial exploitation. And I think that that's gone a long way, because now the SEC, during its examinations, is asking financial advisors, we really want to see your policies and procedures. We want to see that you've developed internal controls. And in fact, for folks that are put in that wonderful position, such as you, where you're managing folks' money, right? We want to make sure that if you have a senior client base where there is the, you know, you're going to be the eyes and ears kind of for that elderly client, you're going to be seeing the transference of money. You probably are in the best position, Scott, to actually understand, oh, I'm starting to see signs of, you know, this person's making massive withdrawals. This is not characteristic of Sally or Joe or whomever the client is. You can actually proactively take steps. So I think the direction that we're going is a lot more proactive advocacy and an expectation by the regulators for you to really take that first step.
Yeah, it's a great point. You are absolutely correct. We do see it with, especially our clients we've had for many, many years. They have tendencies and habits and, quirks in some ways, if you look at it, and how they react to certain situations. So a red flag does come up if you see something that comes across. It's like, this doesn't make sense, or this is something that's out of the ordinary. And, because of the relationships that we have, and that's why it's important to really know your client, know their situations, we're able to identify, okay, something's not right here. And, at least to probe us to ask follow-up questions just to make sure that everything is okay. The reasoning that they're doing something, make sure it makes the best sense for them, not just now, but in terms of what they're looking for in terms of the future. Financial plans are always important as well, because that's the roadmap that we gear on. So anytime they're going to deviate from that, we're going to have an idea in terms of this. This isn't something we talked about all these years, and prompt for follow-up questions and maybe just to be proactive and get involved. But I want to segue to one thing here. Basically, it was an amazing stat that I saw. It's like 1 in 10 Americans age 60 plus, they've experienced elder abuse. And one of the most frequent forms we talked about is financial abuse. And the exploitation comes at a great cost. And one of the studies said it costs as much as $36.5 billion each year in terms of the abuse, in terms of the losses. What are the warning signs that, one can be on the lookout for? And what should the investment advisor play when working with the older clients?
Yeah, and, there's two different, areas that I'd like to cover, in kind of thinking about this, because one of the things where we see elder abuse happen the most is when someone starts suffering from diminished capacity. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to talk about the signs of financial elder abuse. I don't want to say they always go hand in hand, but, naturally, and I don't know about you, but, when we age, it's normal to experience some cognitive changes. I was talking to a colleague yesterday. I'm like, boy, my joints are just not feeling the way they were when, I was 20. Wish that would change. But, cognitively, the same things happen, just like we have physical, experiences, shall we say, as we age. Same thing we happen cognitively. And, the difference is we can expect that we might have some memory loss. We might, might not be as sharp as we were, in our younger years. But, as a result of dementia, especially most commonly, we see Alzheimer's, that's just not a normal part of the aging process. And so, when you start seeing early signs of diminished capacity, some of the things that you are going to see is, number one, of course, confusion. They might all of a sudden, the, particular individual might start showing suspiciousness, and they're saying, Scott, why did you trade in XYZ? What are we doing here? I don't remember talking about this. They might forget that they just talked to you last week about withdrawing some funds, and they're calling you again and making a subsequent request. I think one of the most common, though, themes that we start seeing is some sort of personality change, or they start having challenges with financial management. And, that's where, frequently I'll hear about, oh, my mom, my dad, I went to their house and it's just so sad. They're having trouble paying their bills. And so they've asked me to look over it. So that's often, that doesn't mean they have diminished capacity. It's just one of many signs. But I think, if you were to fast forward and you say, okay, I'm starting to see these red flags, these warning signs, the question is, what am I going to see in the case of an elder financial abuse type situation? And I think the biggest thing that I start seeing is behavioral changes. Okay. You become fearful. You might be distressed. You might be, really taking a look at how that individual appears, even in their personal hygiene. They might seem disheveled and out of, just out of sorts. We also start seeing, if they're abused, what do we sometimes see? People turn to alcohol or drugs, unfortunately. So we might see that increased use. Typically, that person appears incredibly disorganized. And I think that the other thing that, I would say is that, as a financial advisor, you might start getting a lot more calls from that individual. They might be asking the same question. And then what I'm going to call is, there's the people challenge. All of a sudden, we have someone that might be introduced that you're not aware of, okay? A best friend, the sweetheart that he or she didn't have before. You have to look at the collective of all the facts and circumstances and those red flags, but I think, what we start seeing is typically, sudden or unexpected monetary withdrawals. We might see a change in their investment style, and they start questioning you, Scott, why, even though you've had me in a balanced objective for all these years, and we've talked about this, or I'm going to more conservative, they start questioning it. I lost that opportunity in the marketplace. It's almost like they're being coached. And I think that the other thing is that there's now abrupt burst of trust issues. They're starting to not trust.
Absolutely.
And it's so sad when you start seeing that.
Yeah, it is. And like I said, it's always a warning sign. Great points that you've made there. We do recognize that. And like I said, in our industry, this, we're a trusted advisor. We have longstanding relationships, and, people's health and wealth are the two most important things that they focus on. And you could see when health potentially could be deteriorating, it has an impact in terms of how they view and their all aspects of their lifestyle. And, one of the things that is always a head scratcher to us is the other party that comes in at the end, and it's somebody that, you always try and, look out for what's best for your client and, want them to be happy and successful. But you can always see some people with different motives that all of a sudden enter the picture that have not been around before. And it can be a relative. It can be, another trusted advisor that they've brought in. It could be a romantic interest for somebody who, might be in their later stages of life and are alone and are, looking for companionship. And then, especially depending on this, their wealth status, they could be, manipulated in many certain ways by some people that don't have their best interests at stake, but have their own. So we always have to be on the lookout for that as advisors. And, so what happens if we do see something? What do we do?
Yeah, and I think, the number one thing is that as an advisor, I would sit down to have a very candid conversation. You've tried to the extent you can, because this is where it gets really tough, is when that person that's being brought into the meeting is potentially the financial abuser. And, most frequently there's one thing, and I think there's a balancing act. So I want to just encourage this. And there's a fine line between, especially if you have a child there, your son or daughter, there's a fine line between, I'm concerned about mom and dad's well-being. Mom's having a little bit of challenge managing the checkbook, and I just want to be in this meeting because she does have some health issues, right? And we want to make sure she's well taken care of, and we have that income to, for her, for assisted living or what have you. That's a completely different scenario versus, now I'm really interested in mom or dad going to these meetings, start talking about what's the return, what can I expect? And it's always turning not away from the parent to the child or to that individual, or they're continuously influencing mom and dad and saying, well, why don't you go for the winners out there? Let's go a more aggressive strategy. Let's do that. And the most important thing you can do, Scott, is to try to get your client by themselves and say, talk to me. How are you doing? Do you still, and nobody wants to believe that, a loved one, no matter if it's by blood or not, okay, would ever be taking advantage of them. And sometimes they don't see it, but they feel it inside. And if you can get that to come out, one of the things that you could talk about is, if that son or daughter or loved one happens to be the trusted contact, do you still want them to be the trusted contact? And if there are concerns to, I think that your job and role as a fiduciary is to make them aware to the extent that they can cognitively become aware of the situation, if there is a situation. And if you really are scared for them in their position, you can always report them to Adult Protective Services. And by doing so, I want to tell you, there is, for those advisors that adopt the Senior Safe Act, there is immunity. Okay, there's steps you have to take to adopt the Senior Safe Act, but you're immune from any kind of private litigation and cause of action against you for trying to just help someone out. It's very confidential in nature. You're only sharing this information with either law enforcement or that protective agency. And I think that goes a long way just for the family to know that, gosh, if something happens to mom or dad, Scott, you've got eyes and ears and you're watching constantly and always are going to act in their best interest.
Yeah, and it's always interesting, the family dynamics that you have to always sort of skate around as well, because the children or the potential heirs have different things that they think are more important. Basically, when they are able to get the funds to them through, obviously, through death or through gifting, they might have different viewpoints, and they might try and institute what's important to them now versus what's important to mom and dad at that point in time. So you have to juggle. You have to, you don't want to neglect their viewpoints, but if they're not in the best interests, and if they're having influence over what's best for the parents, you have to try and go in there and educate, sympathize, but educate them as well. As this might be appropriate for somebody in your situation, but for your parents, it's not, and we really don't want to deviate that way. So, point I want to bring to everyone is, if you do have questions, obviously type them in. We'll try and grab as many as we can before the end of the show. But what I really wanted to, bring about with Michelle right now is if she can provide a scenario or two, where an aging client needs additional attention and care. Give us a few situations or scenarios where you could see this played out, and we can see, maybe it'll trigger somebody right now. It's like, yeah, I'm going through this at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I promise we'll get to some of these questions at the end. We'll have time for that. In terms of elder abuse, there's two classic examples that I typically see, Scott. The first one is, and I kid you not, and I've lived through this with clients. I'll use a scenario. Let's just say hypothetically, we have a particular client. She happens to be 83 years old, and she walks in, Scott, to your office with a 38-year-old boyfriend. And she's like, oh my gosh, you won't believe who I just met. And I met, I'll call him Dollar Bill. Dollar Bill just walked in with her. And, what you've seen over the last couple of months is your client keeps on, we'll call her Ann Vulnerable. Ann Vulnerable keeps on withdrawing money. And we're seeing, why are we taking out $10,000 chunks at a time? And she's talking to you about the trips they're taking to Bermuda and the Caribbean and what have you. And the latest withdrawal all of a sudden represents 25% of her assets. And you start asking, questions, because as Ann's appearing to you, she just isn't appearing to be herself. She drives in with Dollar Bill and he's in this brand new Mercedes where that's just not his style, or it doesn't look like his kind of style of car. And, when she starts asking you questions, she's starting to forget things. Oh, I forgot I asked you to withdraw that money from me last week, or starts questioning the style and management. And I think that the big thing that, you might ask her as an advisor is, look, I really want to understand, Ann, why are you withdrawing this money? And the response is, well, dear, Bill likes his toys. So, you start taking a look at that, and I've seen, love has no age, and I understand and appreciate that. So please know this was and could be a very likely situation, but there were so many red flags with regards to, whether or not, is this a legitimate, relationship? Is Bill trying to take advantage of it? I mean, I've had situations where, that have come up where, the custodian or a bank might even call the advisor, Scott, and say, look, I know you. I know this is your customer. I've got concerns because this guy Dollar Bill keeps on showing up with Ann at the bank teller window every week. And in those kind of cases, lots of red flags. The question is, who's Ann's trusted contact? Have we talked to her? And have we, started thinking about how can we take steps to control that disbursement? Because there could come a point, and this kind of leads me to the second scenario, where the investor starts questioning your style of management. And in Ann's case, maybe she's a conservative account and she's asking you to go more aggressive. You say, Ann, that's not in your best interest. And a lot of times you have to make the very difficult choice. I want to help. I want to be your fiduciary. But can I still keep this role and responsibility knowing what I know? And if she's going into, a more aggressive style that's not suitable for her, that may be a time that she needs to find another advisor, and you need to have that tough conversation with the family. And there's no right or wrong. It's just a very difficult place to be in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you never like to lose a client. You always want to try and provide as great a service as you can because, managing, like I said, their wealth, I mean, it's dear to their hearts. There's a lot of responsibility for the advisor because, you're in charge of their life being, their well-being for many, many years. And, you know, it's tough to say goodbye to a client, but you also have to look out for your best interests as well. And if the client's not going to adhere to it or is definitely being manipulated or controlled by somebody that's not looking out for their best interest and is going to always negate your advice or your responsibilities, then yeah, you almost have to let them go. Try and work with them as much best as you can. See if things can change. Try and bring their kids or their other trusted contacts in with you. Could be attorneys, could be their accountants, whatever it might be, just to try and work together as a team to counsel. But in some ways, depending on the status of the relationship, you might have to let it go just because you can see that it's going to cause you more problems down the line, and especially if this person who is providing the or swaying them the wrong way continues to gain more and more control of the relationship. It's just going to be more of a headache for you.
Yeah, and I know one of the questions that came in was, and excuse me for just reading this, it says, have you ever seen a situation of abuse by an appointed agent under a power of attorney, and what could be some of the warning signs that the POA might not be working in the best interest of the client or the family member? I mean, I have seen that, and that was exactly, I think this gentleman kind of almost thought about my case study, because that was really the second point I was going to make. What happens, no matter if it's a trusted contact or someone with a POA, and the POA is even a little bit more scary because that's providing that individual with the legal authority. And I will tell you, this is going to be facts and circumstances based. The question is, do you as a financial advisor, if the POA also happens, which normally is, to also be the trusted contact, what do you do? And I think the first step, Scott, that we talked about is you got to try to discuss this with the client, assuming that he or she may not be suffering from dementia and advanced stages of Alzheimer's, to see, are they aware of it? And secondarily, the question would be, could you have a joint conversation with the client and the estate planning attorney to say, look, I just want to throw this out here. We're starting to see this. The only thing you can really do in your power, because technically speaking, by the book, the POA has legal authority over the account. So right. You've got a choice. You can, of course, escalate to Adult Protective Services or law enforcement if you really think it's extraordinary and extreme. You do have the ability to temporarily, again, working with your qualified custodian, stop disbursements, okay, for a 15-day period, 25 if it really needs to escalate, and the custodian, you've got due cause to believe there truly is elder abuse. But I think most importantly, what you also have to determine, and that leads to another question that was asked, is you might have to be in a position to terminate that client relationship if there's nothing else you can do. And I have helped clients do that. It's a super tough choice. Nobody wants to, we're not quitting the relationship, we're quitting the circumstances. And it's about risk mitigation for that client and saying, I can't be a party to this because it's going in the wrong direction. If the client refuses to change the POA and everything else, and they have the legal authority as an advisor, unless it's completely contradictory and you can, you obviously have fear of elder abuse, the best thing you could do is obviously try to get help. And if we can't be successful in that regard, withdraw.
There's a question that just came through, Michelle. It says, are there any books or papers that we can share to educate our family members about elder fraud?
Yeah, and I will tell you that first paper I was talking about, Scott, and maybe we could, post that up in social media for people to see. That investor piece from the SEC was so powerful because it really did talk about what are some of the steps that I can take, and everything from, make sure that first and foremost, that mom, dad, or even yourselves, everybody's established a trusted contact. You just don't know, what if scenario. And I think that the number one area that, we try to figure out is that if somebody is being accused of or if you're concerned, I should say, about financial abuse, where are the books and records? Where do we have keys of the kingdom, from the bank account statements to what investments mom or dad or whomever might have, and where can I find them? Where are those legal documents? Where are the passwords? Are their checks and credit cards locked up? Are they kept safe when they're not in use? Do I have the advanced healthcare directives and a power of attorney in place, again, in the what if scenario? And I think that, the other things you could do is just to try to keep that individual engaged, okay, in social activities, in a protected environment, and trying to keep them also educated with regards to elder scams. So I can't say enough, the SEC is a regulatory body, but the investor advocate has done such an amazing job of talking about all the different checklist of items that an investor should be thinking about, how we can protect our elders, how we can protect our parents. I think that's really, the lines of communication, keeping those open and making sure we've got everything we can to safeguard your loved ones is really the key to try to advance the protections against elder abuse.
Yeah, great question, and it's a great comments that you made, your points and tips. The people who want to do harm are always one step ahead. They always try to be, in terms of the scams, in terms of anything out there now, whether it be through phone scams, through internet scams, whatever it is. Click here. Your grandson is in danger. You got to send some money. You got to wire some money. There's all of these different things that are out there that people just aren't aware of, and they target the elderly because they're the most vulnerable in that sense, and they're not going to understand. They're just going to see, oh, somebody's in trouble, I've got to go help them out. And a lot of times, and we've seen it, they refuse or don't want to ask for advice or help. They think they can do it themselves.
That's
and
right.
What ends up happening is it gets to a point where it's so far down the road that by the time the trusted contacts or advisors or whoever it might be are involved, it's too late. You can't get back what you've already done. And it's a sad world, but it's going to continue that, our seniors are going to fall prey to a lot of these unwarranted abuses. Like I said, whether it be through, and now we're seeing it even through their close relatives, close family members, close contacts that they're seeing it. So it's not just internal. It's external and internal that you have to be wary about. So it just kills me sometimes when I talk to somebody and they just said, "Oh, this happened. What can I do to get this back?" And it's like, you really can't now. We're so far down the line. I sent money somewhere and I want to get it back. There's no opportunity that you can do that right now, and it's just to the point where it damages and hurts their financial capabilities in the future. And let's face it, a lot of people don't have a lot of money when they retire, when they're getting older, and they need this to survive. And when you see a lot of it going away because of misdeeds, it really is. I really feel for our clients, or feel for the that population that is experiencing it, but it's not going to go away.
Well, I think that's right. And the one thing I'll leave you with is, if and when you ever had to call Adult Protective Services, this isn't a snap your fingers and they're going to show up at your front door and investigate. I mean, it's a long process. So even, I'll just talk about our state in California. It is a little bit different in New York, but when you call in California, you can't just call. They're not going to just automatically show up. You've got to actually write all of this information down. So they need to information gather. What was the triggering event? What were the people involved? And, sometimes you might say, gosh, do I really want to put my name on this? And this is part of the process. They need, the social worker is going to need enough information that they can go down and investigate. And, once they investigate and visit the victim, the hardest part is, as an advisor, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. They're going to try to provide services where they can, but a lot of times you're out of the loop. And that's why it's so important, I think, to always keep that as a fiduciary, that close communication with your client. And just, you are, believe it or not, in many cases, their trusted contact. I don't think you should be their trusted contact in this sense, but you are in such a close relationship because of what you're doing with them and their well-being, Scott, for what you do. So thank you for what you do, first and foremost. but secondarily, you're really their eyes and ears and their own advocate. So I just don't want to lose sight of that.
Well, it's you got to love what you do, and we love at Generation Capital, we love our clients. A lot of them started when the firm started. They're not just clients; they're friends, they're family, they're advocates for you. They're your biggest fans. They're your biggest referral sources. So you want to make sure that you can do the best job for them. So we always want to make sure that we don't see warning signs that are coming about that they're going in a direction that's not right for them. So we want to be proactive in our, when we deal with our clients and really advocate for, sound, safe investment advice and make sure they're on the right path. Michelle, is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I think Scott, the biggest advice I can really give to, the folks out there is be aware, be cognizant of it, be aware of these warning signs that we went through. And I would strongly encourage to look at this communication from the SEC with regards to investor protections. Share that with your friends and family. And I think the more knowledge we have, the more power we're going to have and be able to combat elder abuse.
Great advice. I want to thank Michelle Jacko for taking the time for a great discussion on a very important topic. Michelle, how can people find out more information on your firms and the services that you offer?
Sure. Of course, I'd love to hear from you. If you want to call us, our number is 619-298-2880. Or if you'd like to, drop me an email, I can be reached at michelle.jacko@jackolg.com. And thank you for showing those phone numbers. Our website's on the bottom, scrolling ticker on the bottom, so you can see that at jackolg.com. We'd love to hear from you. We do corporate and securities law services. And I can't thank you enough, Scott, for having me be a guest in your generation of our power.
We get it. GenCap Power Hour. Thank you, Michelle. And like I said, it's a great topic. Thank you for being one of our first national experts coming onto our show to, basically have a great conversation on an important topic. So once again, thank you. Our clients, thank you. And our friends, thank you. So I wanted to thank Michelle Jacko for joining us. What a great person, just a knowledge and wealth of information that she has regarding a very important topic. Please reach out to GCM if you have any information or any requests. Continue to follow us on LinkedIn. If you want to learn more about GCM, sign up for a free consultation. We're happy to talk to you about anything portfolio related, financial planning related, even talking about if you have concerns about, financial auto fraud that we talked about in this conversation. We have a newsletter that you can sign up to and receive up-to-date information. And you can follow us at our website, www.gencapmgmt.com. Please follow us on social media, on LinkedIn and Twitter. And also every week we have our market mashup, and we also have John's top tips for great up-to-date financial information. I want to thank everyone for coming again, listening in to our GenCap Power Hour. We look forward to next month having another event. So stay tuned and follow us on LinkedIn. Have a great day. Thank you.